Hey, what's up? I'm Liz, this is Blitz DIY, and today we're going to be discussing some tech news. It's been a week since the back-to-back Apple and Microsoft events, and I think enough time has passed to finally discuss the two events intelligently, with some of the initial hype finally settling down. Now, both events had different features that can cause you to get a bit lost in the weeds, but I think the main takeaway from both events were the new hardware from both camps, specifically Apple's new MacBook Pro and Microsoft's new Surface Book i7 edition, an upgrade to the existing Surface Book, and the brand spanking new Surface Studio, an all-in-one desktop computer and the newest addition to Microsoft's Surface line. In honor of the chronological order of the events, let's begin with Microsoft. The Surface Studio had been rumored for a bit, and it was received quite well by the press at the event, and even the average person in conversations I've had after the news broke. It featured a full touchscreen that utilizes the same pen as the other members of the Surface line, and that screen is a huge 28 inches diagonally. It also has enthusiast-level specs, an Intel Skylake i7 CPU, up to 32 gigabytes of RAM, an NVIDIA 980M graphics card, and up to 2 terabytes of storage space. Now, when you take all of that into consideration, the sticker shock at the starting price of $3,000 isn't as shocking, but it's still incredibly high, and if there is one negative soundbite I kept hearing and reading, it was certainly the price. But Microsoft also unveiled a new input device that will work with the entire Surface line called the Surface Dial. It's basically this large knob that you can turn and twist to control different menus in different programs. Examples that were shown were changing colors while drawing, adjusting volume, zooming in and out, things like that. And the menu you were controlling actually showed up on the screen, and you can even put the Surface Dial onto the screen. So you had the visual confirmation of what you were doing, and the dial also features haptic feedback, so you get the physical confirmation as well, which really helps to build an immersive experience. And now on to Apple. The day after the Microsoft event, Apple took the stage to present their newest edition of the MacBook Pro. There were two very big mic drops from the event that I think most people are focusing on: the Touch Bar and the I/O available on the MacBook. Let's start with the Touch Bar. The newest feature in Apple's bag of tricks basically eliminates the function row of keys on the keyboard, including the escape key. In its place is a touch bar that, much like the Surface Dial, can have different functions and controls depending on the application being used. Now, examples they showed were media controls, the ability to type in emojis, which if you've been sticking with the channel, you know I do have a soft spot for emojis. And they even showed the ability to scrub through a video editing timeline. It's basically a programmable macro keyboard, but instead of keys, it's touch. What's probably the most interesting thing, from my perspective, about the Touch Bar is that it's actually running on the Apple Watch's T1 chip, making it almost a full Apple Watch just in that little bar, just missing the ability to run watchOS at the moment. Now, the other game changer from Apple was the new I/O configuration on the MacBook Pros. The 13-inch version features 2 USB-C ports and a headphone jack, while the 15-inch version features 4 USB-C ports and a headphone jack. Yes, that's it. This means that you'll either be purchasing many new USB-C devices or stocking up on many, many dongles in order to use your old peripherals and devices with these new MacBooks. Also, the irony was not lost on anyone that they kept the headphone jack on the MacBook. So we've talked about the facts, but what does this all mean? I think the main issue is that these are two different companies with different approaches and goals that are both at very different stages. Neither one is inherently good or bad, so to come up with a quote-unquote winner is hard because it would be an opinion and not stone-cold science. To speak in hardware terms, it's like benchmarking a graphics card versus a CPU. Both are great pieces of hardware, but they just do different things, and you can't run a test to compare both without bias. I do think we're seeing Microsoft really come into their own right now, which is exciting on both the operating system front and the hardware side. I think that they're really pushing the envelope of innovation and accessibility and technology, which is so important for both consumers and the industry to keep things competitive. They're also doing all of this successfully, meaning that their stuff works, which is awesome. I think we're watching Apple transition right now. I think that they know they need to really push the envelope to go back to the hype level they were at in the mid to late 2000s. And right now, I think people who had turned to Apple for power hardware are feeling nervous at the idea that Apple seems to be continuously taking away from their design, whether it's a headphone jack, an SD card reader, USB 3.0, function keys, or even the startup sound. I think that most of the hate comes out of that anxiety, and I use the word anxiety because most negative posts seem to be from Apple power users who are essentially ranting on the unspoken topic of, how will I get my work done now? It's fear that change is being forced onto their productivity workflow before that workflow is necessarily ready to change. An example of that is with the USB-C ports. Now people will need to get more adapters and dongles, and people have written articles even exclusively about the fact that more dongles are now necessary. It feels like Apple is experimenting right now, almost like a chef adding and neutralizing flavors in the kitchen. And the fact that the Touch Bar is actually running with the Apple Watch chip is fascinating. And I think we'll have more implementations in the future. There are also rumors that Apple may move to manufacture their own CPUs to eliminate Intel from the entire process. So with all of this in mind, you can see the vague outlines that there may be something big forming behind the scenes that may make all of these seemingly random changes to hardware that's kind of been tried and true make sense someday, especially if you look at the iPad Pro lineup specs, which are quite impressive and almost seem to be kind of not really being talked about a lot. I just hope that they don't start chasing Microsoft out of the pressure from the outside like Microsoft kind of did in the late 2000s. And as I said, these are two totally different companies, and they do what they do best. But what about you? Do you agree, or do you think that these two events were a bit more black and white? Do you think that Apple is the true leader of all tech innovation and that Microsoft is out of their league making their own hardware? Or are you a die-hard member of the PCMR community with no room for tech companies named for fruit? Let me know in the comments below and toss me a thumbs up or thumbs down depending, and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more content like this. Find me on social media for behind the scenes and similar discussions like this, as I like to post a lot of tech news articles. Thank you for watching, and until next time, this has been Blitz City DIY.